people, mainly women, it started out as mainly women, you know, oh, it's silk, I'm royal, oh yeah, I'm a queen. You know, so now y'all know, now the sisters know why brothers be coming to you, peace queen. Part of that is something else. They want you to join. Something. They want you to join something. So, but it worked. So that's the Nation of Islam was founded here in Paradise Valley. They had a number of buildings, and they would be in a building for a little while and have to be somewhere else. And of course, there was a major scandal in 1934 when one of the members sacrificed a few people on his dining room table. Robert Kareem Johnson, and they found, after they arrested him, they found in his things the secret rituals of the Lost Foundation of Islam, which is one of the early names of the Nation of Islam, the Lost Foundation of Islam. And one of the writings was you got to sacrifice 6 people. Now, the Nation of Islam does not have that book. They don't distribute that book anymore. But recently, one of the early members of the Nation of Islam passed away, and his family donated, or they may have sold it to the lawyer Gregory Reed. Gregory Reed, who gets he gets everybody's ancient stuff somehow. So he gets it, and he has copies of the secret ritual of the Lost Foundation of Islam, which is written, the only book we know of that's written by Master Farad Muhammad. He has his gavel, which is part of. It shows that he's I forgot the name of the position, but it's like a judge in the Masonic meetings. You can see his medallion. It's in front of a church. I mean, this is all kind of like, you know, way out here, huh? So we talked about how the foundation of the Anglican Church, you know, we talked about how that happened. And here's Washington, who enslaved 250 Africans on his plantation, Mount Vernon. And Mount Vernon, when Washington became president, the presidential house, there was no such thing as the White House yet. The presidential house was in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia had a gradual emancipation law. If you stayed in Philadelphia for 30 days, you were free. You know, so that's why a lot of the abolitionist movement is in Philadelphia. The Free African Society, the African Meeting House, all that stuff is in Philly, you know, because of its early abolitionist laws and black people saying, this is a spot. You know, I'm being here.
Colonial town.
Colonial town. Well, no. This is early United States after the Revolution. So 1780s, early 1800s. So when he becomes president, he brings his house enslaved Africans with him. He brings them into Philly, and they're supposed to get free. So what he does is he rotates them every 28 days. So 28 days, he sends them back to Virginia, brings 2 more from Virginia. He keeps them rotating to get around the gradual abolition law. And this is George Washington, you can't tell a lie. Father of the country. That's him. But I didn't come here for him, so let's go. But nobody called it all that. It was the Ford Auditorium. And why we care about this is that Malcolm X gave what is known as the last message at the Ford Auditorium, 1965, February 14th, 1 week before he was assassinated. Yep. My brother's birthday too.
I have that speech.
Yep, the last message he gave right here in Detroit. It was the real name of that program was the first annual Scholarship and Dignity preparation presentation, something like that. And of course, one of the chief organizers of this was the Reverend Albert Cleave, who is now known as Jeramogi Abebe Ajiman, founder of the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church, Shrine of the Black Madonna, who was a good friend of Malcolm X. You understand that earlier that night, his house was firebombed. So his house got firebombed. He had already made the, and if those of you went to the film yesterday, I mean, I'm a historian, I have to keep it real. His house was firebombed, and the organizer of the firebombing was Yusuf Shah, Captain Joseph X, captain of the FOI at Temple Number 7 in New York. He had got a contingent of people from the Corona Queens Temple, Temple 7B, to firebomb the house. They had been trying to throw Malcolm out of the house for about 2 months. He had been to court, and they had resolved they was going to throw him out the house. Malcolm, of course, contested everything, saying that because of his contribution to the nation, the house should be his. And the nation was suing him to throw him out of his house. And they firebombed the house. And with his family still in, 2 explosives didn't go off. 2 Molotov cocktails didn't go off. Had they went off, there wouldn't have been no way they could have got out of that house. So that was a blessing that it didn't blow up and the kids didn't die. But fire becomes a theme in the Malcolm X family, in the Malcolm X history. You go back to when he's a baby in Omaha, Nebraska, the Ku Klux Klan burns their home, burns a cross outside the home and threatens to burn down the home unless the littles move out because they're preaching this Garvey talk. Malcolm's father was an organizer for the United Negro Improvement Association as well as being a Baptist preacher. And so they moved out of Omaha, Nebraska and moved to Wisconsin just for a little while and then moved to Lansing. And they moved to Lansing and the person who lets them buy the house didn't follow the racial restrictive covenant. So the white folks want him to move out. He refuses. They burn his house in Lansing. So they have to move to another part of Lansing. And of course, he ends up being murdered in Lansing. And then, so now you get to Elmhurst, Queens, East Elmhurst, Queens, and his house was firebombed, in this case, by the members of the Nation of Islam. And then, of course, after he dies in 1997, Betty Shabazz is killed in a fire that was started by Malcolm Shabazz, her grandson, who was living with her because Kubila was in a rehab program because she was charged with plotting the assassination of Louis Farrakhan, who she believed was involved in the murder of her father. So history is a connection of all these different things. You can't understand one thing without connecting it to the thing before. But so Malcolm gives this speech, and it's just funny, some of the people that was here. Of course, Reverend Albert Cleage is here, Milton Henry and Richard Henry, the founders of the Republic of New Africa, who taped all of his Detroit speeches. They're here, and they taped this speech. And Brazil Denard, the musician, is here and does the aims and goals of the Nation of Islam. And this is the beginning. This 1962 is kind of what I consider the beginning of the rift between Malcolm's view of what the Nation of Islam ought to be doing and the view of many in the leadership, other parts of the leadership. Malcolm was. Now, many of the ministers of the Nation of Islam tried to keep their speeches about the religion, about being good parents, about raising your children, a typical minister sermonic teachings from the Nation of Islam. Women being modest and men being good providers, and Allah is our God and Muhammad is his messenger. Elijah Muhammad is who they mean when they say that. But Malcolm would say that, but he always would add this political edge. And part of the reason of this is because Malcolm was just different. He grew up in a home of Garveyites. So that's part of what made Malcolm Malcolm. The other part of this is Malcolm had a cabinet of advisors who were not part of the Nation of Islam. He had a history cabinet composed of people like John Henry Clark and Louis Michaud, who owned the bookstore in Harlem, that humongous bookstore. And he had a political cabinet with people like Adam Clayton Powell and Fidel Castro. He had when it came to African or Pan-Africanism, he had friends of friends with people like Jomo Kenyatta and Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba. It was Malcolm that organized the massive protests outside the UN after Patrice Lumumba was assassinated. And the Nation of Islam was against all of that. So Malcolm was bucking against the system all the time. And it was going to at some point come to a head that it was either the Nation of Islam was going to change or Malcolm was going to be out of the Nation of Islam. One way or another, it was going to happen. Now it got sped up because of some other incidents, but it was going to happen because Malcolm did not fit the mold of what the Nation of Islam's ministers were doing at that time. And this caused, in Temple number 7 itself, it caused a massive rift between him and Captain Joseph. They kind of started together and ended up in Temple number 7 together. And so they started out very close. But this rift came because the Nation of Islam is or it was, I don't want to speak about what it is now, that's for anybody to decide for themselves, but it was a military theocracy. So it really organized itself on military guidelines. So with Elijah Muhammad as the leader of both sides. So the military side was run by the military, not by the ministry. The military side was run by Supreme Captain Edward Sharif, the son-in-law of Elijah Muhammad. The ministry side was run by, of course, it was run by Elijah Muhammad, but it allegedly was run by Malcolm X. He was the national minister, national spokesman for the Nation of Islam. But ministers in general could not tell the military what the FOIs, the military of the Nation of Islam, could not tell the military what to do. They followed the orders of the captain. And if you really want to know who was in control of a temple at that time, it was the captain, the FOI captain. That's who was in control of the temple. So that's who says what's going to happen in that temple and what's not going to happen. Now, of course, with Malcolm being who Malcolm was, more famous than any other member of the Nation of Islam, the rules kind of was bent for him. I mean, he kind of did stuff that only FOI captains really could do. Because he was almost, outside of Elijah Muhammad, he was the Nation of Islam. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963. A lot of black people love John F. Kennedy. To this day, a lot of black folks love John F. Kennedy. And so it is true that Elijah Muhammad told all his ministers not to say anything with respect to the death of the president. Now, all year, both Elijah and Malcolm have been wearing Kennedy out in speeches. You know, he's a fox. You can go to the South and be done in by political wolves, or you can go to Kennedy and be done by political foxes. Both from the dog family, both are canine, and whichever dog you choose, you're gonna end up in the doghouse. These are the kind of speeches they gave about Kennedy. So now he's killed, and Malcolm, all the ministers I told did not to say anything with respect to the president. But I want you to understand something, that the Malcolm's being silenced by Elijah Muhammad after he gives the speech. Elijah Muhammad was supposed to give a speech, just to understand. The speech was in New York. Elijah Muhammad was supposed to give a speech. Elijah Muhammad was chronically ill. So he was unable to make the speech. Malcolm spoke in his place. Most people understood that if Elijah was supposed to speak and he can't make it, Malcolm was going to speak. So Malcolm spoke.